My name is Lena. I am 29 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the quiet one in my family, the one who set up the tables while my sister took the credit, the one whose name never made it into the stories my mother liked to tell. At my sister's wedding, I walked in expecting at least a chair with my name on it. Instead, I was left standing by the door, mistaken for staff by a stranger who handed me his empty glass. To understand how I reached that moment, I need to take you back to the years when being invisible was the only role I was ever given. I grew up in a small house in Albany, upstate New York, the kind of place where every corner held a memory, but not always the kind I wanted to keep. From the very beginning, it was clear that my sister Jada was the star. She knew how to smile at the right time, how to flatter adults with a few sweet words, how to make people lean in and laugh. I was different. I was quiet. I spoke my mind too directly, and I preferred to sit with a pencil and paper in my hand, sketching the things I could not say out loud. In our family, honesty never won me applause. I remember afternoons when the living room would fill with relatives. Jada would sing a song or retell a story from school, and the room would erupt in laughter. My mother would beam with pride, telling everyone how talented her younger daughter was. I usually sat on the floor nearby, sketching in my notebook, hoping someone might notice, but they rarely did. If my mother caught sight of me, she would shake her head and remind me to put the drawings away and help set the table. To her, art was nothing more than a distraction. Jada understood what my mother wanted, and she delivered it every time. At dinner, even if the stew was oversalted, she would say how perfect it tasted, and my mother would reward her with an extra slice of pie. When I said the truth that it was too salty, my mother sighed and called me difficult. That word stayed with me. Difficult. It was not shouted, it was not cruel, but it carried a weight. It told me that being myself was a problem. My father was different, or at least I thought so. He was kind in small ways. He owned a hardware store and came home tired, but he never raised his voice. When my mother criticized me, he did not join in. Sometimes he slipped a second helping onto my plate when no one was looking, as if to say he saw me, but he never spoke up. His silence was not violent, yet it left its own scar. I wanted him to tell me I was fine, the way I was, but he never did. I learned that silence can hurt almost as much as harsh words. At school events, the pattern repeated. During a talent show, Jada sang a pop song and the crowd cheered. My aunts clapped until their hands turned red. I showed my mother the drawing I'd worked on all week, a picture of the two of us under the same roof. And she said it was nice, but that Jada's performance had been amazing. It was always amazing when it was Jada. With me, it was just nice. So I built a private world in my bedroom. My walls were covered with sketches of places I imagined colours that gave me comfort and characters who could say the things I could not. In that space, I mattered. I whispered to myself about the drawings, as if the lines and colours could hear me better than my own family did. It was lonely, yes, but it was also safe. My art became the one place where I did not feel like a mistake. Looking back now, I realise no one intended to be cruel. My mother wanted daughters who fit her idea of success, my father wanted peace, and Jada wanted the spotlight. But intentions do not erase outcomes. The outcome was simple. Jada was the sun, and I was the shade she cast. From the start, I learned how it felt to live unseen, to have your worth questioned, not with anger, but with neglect. That quiet neglect shaped everything that came after, and though I did not know it then, it was the first wound in a story that would take years to reach its breaking point. This was how I became the shadow child. If I was the shadow child, then Jada grew into the golden one. That truth settled in slowly as we became adults. While I was still trying to carve out a space where I could matter, she had already stepped into the spotlight my family had been holding for her since the day she was born. Jada worked as an HR manager at a large insurance company in Albany, and in our family that meant stability, respect, and proof that she was everything a daughter should be. She wore tailored clothes, carried herself with the kind of confidence that made people trust her, and she always had a story to tell about her office, her boss, or the latest corporate event. Every time she walked into a room, people asked her questions about her job, her salary, her fiancé, or the trip she was planning. It was clear to everyone, especially my mother, that Jada had done everything right. My life went in a very different direction. I started a community art program where children could paint freely, especially kids who struggled with communication or lived with autism. It was small, and it did not make much money, but I had seen things there that no paycheck could measure. I had watched a boy who had not spoken in months whisper "Mom" as he finished his first painting. I had seen children use colours and brushes to say what they could not with words. To me, it was more than work. It was hope and healing made visible. I believed in it even when no one else in my family did. At family dinners, the difference between our paths was always on display. Jada would talk about her company's holiday party, and my mother's face would light up. She would ask about the people Jada worked with, the promotion she was chasing, and how proud she must feel to have a job that everyone respected. When it was my turn to speak, I would try to share about the new families who had joined my program, or the way one of the kids had finally sat through an entire session without breaking down. But before I could finish, my mother would cut me off with the same line I had heard for years. "That's nice, Lena, but when will you get a real job?" Those words burned every time. They told me that no matter what I did, no matter how much good I created, it would never be enough. To her and to most of my family, real meant steady, real meant profitable, real meant something that looked impressive on a resume. Jada fit that picture perfectly. I never did. My father sat quietly through these meals. He never joined in with the dismissals, but he never defended me either. Sometimes I call his eyes on me soft and heavy, like he wanted to say something, but the words never came. His silence was almost worse than my mother's sharpness. At least her criticism acknowledged that I existed. His quiet left me wondering if he agreed with her or if he simply had nothing to give. Jada did not need to say much to make her point. A small smile, a glance across the table, a little shake of her head when my mother dismissed me. It was not cruel in an obvious way, but it was enough to remind me that she knew she was winning. She was the one with the crown, and I was the one with the invisible work no one respected. I cannot lie, part of me felt proud of what I had built. When I was in the art room with those children, handing out paints, encouraging them to try, and seeing their faces soften with joy, I felt whole. I felt certain that my life mattered. But sitting at that dinner table listening to everyone praise Jada and ask her endless questions while I sat there with nothing but my quiet stories, that pride slipped away. In its place grew frustration, and beneath that a tired kind of resentment that I carried silently. In my mother's eyes, Jada wore the crown. A steady job, a steady paycheck, and a fiancé who worked in finance. She was proof that my mother had raised a daughter the world admired. And me, I was still the shadow, holding dreams no one believed in. But the truth is, Jada had not just earned that crown as an adult. She had been shaping it for herself since we were children, taking pieces of me along the way. When I was little, I loved the small things I could call my own. A pair of simple sneakers, a backpack with a pattern I had picked, a camera my father bought me for a school project. Those things mattered because they felt like mine. But with Jada, nothing stayed mine for long. If I got shoes, she demanded a pair that cost more and shined brighter. If I carried a backpack, she wanted the same one in a more expensive brand. When I started using my little camera, she convinced my parents to get her a new digital model, and soon she was posting pictures while mine stayed in the drawer. Whatever I had, she had to claim it. And once she did, everyone forgot I had it first. It was not just things. Even when I tried to express myself, she found a way to turn it into her own performance. I remember sitting at the kitchen table sketching quietly in my notebook. She leaned over, copied the idea, and ran to show my mother. Mum clapped, called her talented, and praised her creativity, never asking where the idea came from. It happened again and again. I would make something, she would take it, and somehow she always ended up being the one applauded. As we got older, Jada turned this habit into an entire image. In high school, when social media became important, she built a perfect version of our family online. She posted smiling photos at birthday parties, posed shots at family barbecues, carefully edited pictures where she was always front and centre. People commented on how close we all looked, how lucky my parents must be. But what they never saw was me behind the scenes, stringing up decorations, arranging food, or taking the photos she would later post. My work never appeared in the frame, and neither did I. Jada lived for the likes, and I faded further into the background. My mother encouraged it. She told Jada she was her shining daughter, the one who made the family look good. She bragged about those photos to friends, about how polished and accomplished her younger daughter was. She never mentioned the person who stayed up late cleaning dishes or setting up tables so those perfect moments could exist. She never mentioned me. I can still hear the echo of it in my head. Every time Jada showed off something new, every time she recreated what I had with a flashier version, every time my mother praised her and overlooked me, the same feeling spread through me. It was not loud anger, but a steady, bitter kind of humiliation. It told me that no matter what I had, what I created, or what I gave, Jada could always take it, shine it up, and make it hers. And the world, especially my mother, would always prefer her version. Looking back, I realised that this constant copying was not harmless. It was a theft that never stopped. I could never keep something as my own. If I bought it, she had to have it. If I made it, she had to copy it. If I worked for it, she had to claim it. She lived in the spotlight, and I lived in her reflection. That kind of constant theft does not fade with time. It plants something deeper, something that waits. And inside me, the resentment was already growing, even if no one could see it. That kind of constant theft does not fade with time. It waits, and inside me, the resentment was already growing, even if no one could see it, and it finally found a target when it touched the one part of my life I believed was safe from Jada's reach. Daniel and I had been together for 3 years. He worked in finance, steady and logical, a man who measured choices and liked clear plans. I was not that. I was the one who believed in the slow work of small changes in kids, with paint on their hands, in art that did not fit on a neat checklist. We loved each other, but we fought about what the future should look like. He wanted dates and deadlines. I wanted space to breathe and build. When we decided on a 6-month break, it felt like a grown-up choice. We agreed to step back, think hard, and return with an answer. I was scared, but I thought there was honesty in the pause. I told myself that time could help us hear each other again. Jada found out about the break, and for a little while she played the concerned sister, asking how I was holding up, nodding, like she understood the difference between giving up and taking a breath. Then she started bringing up Daniel in casual ways, saying she had seen him at a coffee shop near his office, mentioning a quick chat about work, asking me odd questions about investments and policies, as if she cared about these things for the first time in her life. I told myself it was nothing. Albany is a small world for people who chase the same kind of hours. But her questions grew more precise, and she smiled when I answered, like she'd found the right door and was testing the handle. It did not take long for the texts to begin. She said she had a work issue and needed his advice, that she was preparing for a meeting, and he had insight. Then there were the casual run-ins that happened too often to be chance. A networking mixer he mentioned to me once became a place she happened to be. A cafe he liked became a spot where she grabbed a late latte and posted a bright photo with a view that I recognized. When Daniel and I spoke during the break, something in him had shifted. His voice was flat where it used to be warm. He was careful with his words where he used to be open. He said he was tired, that he needed to be with someone who understood the way he saw the world. I thought we were still in the space where we were allowed to be unsure together, but his uncertainty felt like it was already closing. I noticed Jada dropping hints at family dinners, small details only Daniel had told me before. A client story, a joke about a missed train, a line about loving order because chaos is disrespectful. She said it lightly as if she found it online, but I knew where it came from. One afternoon, I saw them across a street downtown, standing too close for two people who were only talking about work. She touched his sleeve and he did not move away. I did not confront them that day. I went home and sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall, and for the first time, the word humiliation landed with its full weight. I had thought the worst thing would be losing him. It turns out the worst thing was understanding that my sister wanted him because I had him. The break ended with a short conversation I still remember line by line. Daniel said we were not headed the same direction. He said it with a tone that made it clear the decision had already been made. I asked if there was someone else. He looked away and said we both knew the answer did not matter. He never admitted the overlap. He did not say Jada's name. He did not need to. I heard it anyway. I was not dramatic. I did not cry in front of him. I said I understood, even though I did not. I said I hoped he found what he was looking for, even though I knew what he had found was the same polished surface that had fooled my mother for years. After that, it did not take long. Jada and Daniel became official, and my mother's pride swelled until it filled every corner of the house. She said life works out the way it should, that some people are just meant for each other. I watched her serve Jada a second helping of dessert and talk about how wonderful it was that family stayed close, and all I could think was how small I felt in my own skin. When I saw the ring on Jada's finger, a ring that could have been mine in a different version of our lives, something in me went very still. It was not the simple pain of a breakup. It was the sharp cut of a theft that had moved from shoes and photos to love and loyalty. In our family, Jada had learned that if I had something, she could take it and make it look better, and people would clap. She had done it again, and this time the applause was loud enough to drown out my heartbeat. I tried to tell myself that Daniel's choice freed me from a future that would have asked me to be smaller than I am. Maybe that is true, but the truth can live beside another truth, which is that their choice humiliated me, and my mother's smile told me I should accept it as fate. I did not explode. I did not beg. I did what I always do. I went quiet. I let the hurt settle where only I could see it, and I began to keep score in a way I never had before. Not to prove a point to them, but to remember for myself that what they called fate was a chain of choices. Jada chose to cross a line. Daniel chose to hold the door. My mother chose to clap. And I chose to see it clearly. Clarity would matter later. For now, I learned to live with the knowledge that my sister did not just want what I had. She wanted the power she felt when she took it. That was the day my resentment stopped waiting and started hardening into something else. It would be a long time before anyone saw it, but it was there, and it was not going away. It was not going away. The feeling that had hardened inside me after Jada and Daniel became official only grew louder once their happiness turned into a show. The engagement party proved it. The room was full, the music soft and sweet, and a slideshow played on a screen that made every moment of their relationship look like it had been waiting for applause. There were pictures of them on weekend trips, pictures of them laughing in restaurants, pictures of them holding hands under perfect light. Aunts wiped their eyes, uncles lifted glasses, and cousins said it was like watching a movie. I stood close enough to smile when someone turned and looked at me, but far enough to understand that I was not really part of the story. No one asked me how I was doing. No one asked about my work or my life. They asked me to pass plates or hold a jacket. I did it without making a sound. At one point, Jada thanked my mother for a registry gift that I knew I had paid for. I had transferred money to my mother and asked her to pick it up for me because my bank account was tight that month. Jada hugged her and said it was perfect, and my mother accepted the thanks as if it had always been her idea. I caught her eye for a second, waiting for a simple correction, but she only smiled and moved on. It felt small to everyone else, and heavy to me, the kind of moment that tells you exactly where you stand. After that party, my phone became a weekly reminder that I did not belong in their picture. My mother called like clockwork, her voice bright with plans. She talked about dress fittings and menu tastings, cake flavours and floral colours, the band and the photographer, the photo booth and the seating chart. When I tried to share anything about my art programme, a child who had finally stayed calm for a full class, or a parent who had written to say thank you, she said that was nice and then kept going with wedding news. Sometimes I put the phone on speaker and stared at the ceiling while she told me about napkins and chargers and signature drinks. By the end of each call, I felt like the air had thinned around me. I had words to say, but there was no room for them. Jada announced her bridal party soon after. 10 bridesmaids, a mix of co-workers and cousins, including 2 relatives from out of state that I barely knew. My name was not on the list. People on the group chat sent heart emojis and said how beautiful it would be to see all those women in matching dresses. I read the messages and thought about how far away a sister can feel while still living in the same town. When I saw her in person, she mentioned the list with a shrug, as if leaving me out made perfect sense. She said it was hard to keep the numbers even, and that I would understand. I said I did because I had learned that it was easier to say yes than to ask why. Then they announced the venue. A vineyard in the Hudson Valley, all rolling hills and long views, the kind of place that looks like a postcard, the kind of place where joy is expected to bloom on command. People gasped when they saw the pictures. My mother said it was perfect and that the fairy lights alone were worth the drive. I agreed that it was beautiful because it was, and because there was nothing to gain from saying anything else. Still, I felt a quiet ache when I imagined myself there. I did not see a seat with my name on it. I did not see a place where I would fit. Every step of the way, their plans felt less like a celebration and more like a parade. The slideshow, the weekly calls, the registry moment, the bridesmaid list, the vineyard reveal. Each piece told the same story. They had written me out, and the world nodded along. I am not proud of the way I swallowed things I should have said. I wish I had asked my mother why she took credit for my gift. I wish I had told Jada how empty it felt to see distant cousins lined up beside her while I stood in the back. But wishes do not change facts. The facts were simple. Jada and Daniel were the golden pair. My mother was the master of ceremonies, and I was the quiet figure just outside the frame. That is the truth of the engagement parade. It was not just an event, it was a lesson. A reminder that in my family, approval looks a certain way, and if you do not match that image, you are not invited to sit down. I did not argue. I watched. I took notes in my head. I told myself that clarity was a kind of power, even if it did not feel like it yet. But that power slipped through my fingers the night of the rehearsal dinner, when every hope I had of being included turned into proof that I never was. The dinner was held at an upscale restaurant in Albany, the kind with long tables set under soft light candles, flickering, and waiters weaving between chairs with trays balanced high. I walked in holding a small sketchbook I had designed for Jada, a gift meant to feel personal and thoughtful, something only a sister could give. I thought, maybe she would see it and remember that I was part of this moment too. I stood near the wall for a long time, watching everyone else take their seats. The tables filled quickly, the room buzzing with chatter and laughter. Bridesmaids clinked glasses. Daniel's friends from work shook hands with relatives I had not seen in years. And I stayed where I was smiling when someone's eyes brushed over me, but no one waved me over. I held the sketchbook against me, waiting for a pause, waiting for someone to notice there was no chair left for me. Jada floated past with her bridesmaids at her side. She gave me a quick half smile, the kind you give to someone you hardly know, then turned right back to her friends without breaking stride. They burst out laughing at some story she was telling, their voices filling the space between us. It was like being invisible in my own family's gathering. Across the room, my mother was leaning over the seating chart with a pen in hand. She looked focused, fussing with place cards, making sure every table had the right balance. I waited until she looked up and told her quietly that I had not seen my name anywhere. She glanced down at the chart, frowned like I had interrupted something important, and said, "We'll figure something out tomorrow." Then she turned back to the list, her pen scratching as if the problem had already been solved. I stood there with her words echoing in my head. "We'll figure something out tomorrow." That meant there was no plan for me, no seat for me, no place for me. The longer I stood there, the clearer it became. Every chair was full, every glass raised, and there I was still standing. No one offered to squeeze me in, no one slid a chair over, no one even suggested I take a seat at the edge. It was not an accident. It was the shape of a choice. They had not planned for me to be part of the table. I felt the sketchbook heavy in my hands. It was supposed to be a small gesture, something to show that I cared even if I was not part of the bridal party. Now it felt out of place, like a gift from a stranger who had wandered into the wrong event. I set it gently on a side table near the entrance, tucked between a vase of flowers and a stack of menus. Then I turned and walked out. No one called my name. No one stopped me. The sound of laughter and glasses clinking carried out behind me as I pushed open the door to the street. The cold air hit me sharp against my skin, but at least it was honest. At least the night made no effort to pretend I belonged. As I walked away, I told myself it was only the rehearsal, but I knew the truth. Rehearsals are practice, and this was practice for tomorrow. If they had not found me a seat tonight, they were not going to find me one at the wedding either. They never planned to. They never planned to, and the next day, the vineyard proved it. The hills were green, the trees were strung with lights, even in daylight, the kind of place made for photographs that tell strangers your life turned out perfect. I walked in quietly in the same navy dress I had worn to other family events, the kind that lets you blend in. People were gathering by the entrance where the seating chart stood like a welcome sign. Names in neat calligraphy tables arranged like a small city, everyone pointing and smiling when they found themselves printed there. I moved closer and traced the rows with my eyes slow at first, then faster, and then all over again. Because sometimes denial needs a second look. My name was not there. Not on the top, not at the bottom, not tucked into a corner where someone might have tried to add me at the last second. Guests brushed past me, perfume and cologne and soft laughter mixing in the air, and I stood still as if stillness could make a chair appear. It did not. Inside the hall, the music began. and 200 guests pulled back their chairs in a soft wave of sound. I stayed near the side door, half in the room, and half out of it, the spot where staff moved in and out with trays and ice buckets. A man in a dark suit stopped beside me without looking at my face and pressed his glass into my hand. "More ice, please," he said, and walked away. The cold pressed through my fingers and into the small bones of my hand, and I felt my cheeks heat the way they do when you know there are eyes on you. I set the glass on a tray as a server passed, and I stayed where I was because there was nowhere else to go. The ceremony had been short and glossy, the sort that leaves no rough edges to catch on. Now, Jada and Daniel stepped onto the small stage, the crowd rising for them with cheers that felt both loud and far away. Phones lifted like flowers toward the sun. Jada looked like a bride from a magazine, lace and light, and the smile she had perfected since we were kids. She thanked the venue, the planner, the families who had travelled, and then she turned toward the room as if she were about to share something sweet. My sister, she said, has always lived in dreams, and it rolled out soft enough that some people laughed because they thought it was a joke. She went on saying she was grateful our mother had stepped in to handle the gift on my behalf because some people just are not built for practical things, and then she let the line drop like a stone into a quiet pond. No wonder there is no seat for someone who does not belong. The room did not gasp. It did something worse. It shifted. A few faces turned toward me. A few more looked down at their phones. A few smiled the way people smile when they are not sure if they are allowed to be uncomfortable. I stood near the door, exactly where her words had placed me a picture that matched the story. Someone near the stage laughed too hard, the kind of laugh that makes others join in because it feels safe to do so. Jada lifted her glass and held the silence like a cue, and then offered one more line with that smooth voice that always got her what she wanted. Some people are part of the story and some watch from the side. The clapping that followed sounded like it was happening in another room. Phones were still up, still recording, and for a moment I saw myself as the frame would show me later, a woman in a navy dress by a door while the crowd turned to the stage. I thought of all the small ways it had led here, the tiny losses that never seemed worth a fight, the copied shoes, the borrowed ideas, the photos I took that proved how invisible I had been. I felt the humiliation settle low and heavy, not hot rage, but a steady weight, and I knew this was what they would remember if the night ended on her words. It would be the clip that lived on their screens, the story that hardened into truth. I let myself feel it for one long breath. I did not run. I did not cry. I did not try to explain myself to anyone who would only nod and look past me. I stood there and watched my sister enjoy her victory the way she always had, with a smile that said the world agreed with her. What she did not know, what almost no one knew, was that I had not come here empty-handed. I had come with something she could not copy, something she could not turn into her own shine. There is a difference between being silent and being helpless. I had been silent for a very long time. I was done being helpless. I looked past the stage to the back of the room, where a friend stood by the booth and met my eyes with a small nod. The knot in my chest loosened, not from joy, but from certainty. They wanted this moment to define me, and for a second it did. Then it ended. The next moment would be mine. I gave the smallest nod toward the back of the room, and the house lights flickered just enough to make the chatter dip and the eyes lift. The LED screen behind the stage woke up in a wash of light that swallowed the fairy strings and the centerpieces, and even the lace on Jada's dress. For a heartbeat, no one knew what they were seeing, and then the first photo filled the screen. Jada in a dark coat, fingers laced with a man who was not Daniel, the two of them stepping out of a hotel lobby, shoulders tilted toward each other, the way people lean when they think they are alone. A few gasps broke loose, small and sharp. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" and then more voices followed like a wave pulling back from shore. The image held long enough to be undeniable, and then it slid away, and the video started. Shaky at first, like a phone held low from across the street, Jada laughing in the passenger seat of a car, turning her face to kiss the man's cheek. Then the frame cut to a clearer shot of them walking under the hotel awning. At night, his hand on the small of her back, her head tipped in close, the kind of closeness you do not fake. Jada's smile on stage drained from her face, one shade at a time. The bouquet in her hand dipped. Daniel's jaw went still. Phones, that had been pointed at me when I stood by the door, swung as one toward the stage lenses, catching the screen, catching the bride, catching the truth that had just landed in the middle of their perfect day. Then the audio rolled clean and simple, a man's voice carried through the speakers and across the tables. "Jada, you better head back before Daniel gets suspicious." The sentence hung in the air like a bell, and in the silence that followed, you could hear breathing and a chair leg scrape and the soft click of someone stopping a laugh halfway. There was no room left for doubt. This was not a rumour. This was not a mean story told by a bitter sister. It was Jada on the screen, and it was a voice saying Daniel's name. She tried to move first. Her lips parted and she reached for the microphone, but nothing came out. Her eyes flicked from the crowd to Daniel and back to the moving pictures behind her, like she was searching for a corner she could cut out and hide in. Daniel did not look at me. He looked only at her and at the screen, as if the two could not be part of the same room, and yet there they were joined and everyone could see it. People were whispering now, not loud, but steady, the way truth spreads when it no longer needs permission. I did not say a word. I did not need to. I had collected these pieces quietly the way you collect proof when you know your voice will be called a lie. A friend had filmed from across the street on a night I could not be there. Another had sent me a short clip from inside the parking area, where they laughed in the car before walking in. The audio came from a recording made in a hallway where they thought no one could hear. I did not have to push or scream or make a scene. I only had to hold the room in front of the screen until the room understood what it was seeing. The screen kept rolling, not cruelly, just long enough for the story to land. Jada tried again, a step forward. A breath, a hand that trembled just enough to show. She looked beautiful and ruined at the same time, a picture that would have won 1,000 likes if it had been about something else. A woman at a nearby table covered her mouth. A man muttered that he knew he had seen her somewhere last week. Someone snorted a laugh and then coughed to hide it. And there I was, still by the door, still in the navy dress, no longer the extra in the scene. I felt a strange kind of calm settle over me. Not joy, not triumph, just the relief of watching the weight of a lie fall away at last. For years I had been told I was hard to love because I would not play along. For years I had watched her bend a room toward her and take whatever she wanted from mine. Tonight, the room bent toward the truth instead. My friend at the booth glanced over, and I gave the smallest nod to bring the loop to an end. The screen faded to black and the light steadied. No one moved right away. Jada stood planted, as if the floor had turned to ice under her feet. Daniel finally looked down at his hands like they were no longer his. Somewhere, a phone chimed. It sounded almost funny against the silence, like the day had tried to pretend it was still normal. It was not. I breathed in and let the air reach all the way to the bottom of my lungs. I had not come to ruin a wedding. I had come to stop a story that had been ruining me for years. The truth had spoken for me. It had used her own name, and his. It had filled the room better than any toast. Whatever came next would not belong to me either. It would belong to the people who had chosen each other and chosen to lie about it. I did not need to guide the fallout. I only needed to stand still and let it happen. I stood there and waited for the first words to break the silence, knowing they would, and knowing they would not be mine. The first words that broke the silence were not mine, they were Daniel's, and they cut straight through the room. "Jada, what is this?" He did not shout, but the tight edge in his voice made everyone lean in. Jada's shoulders went stiff, and her bouquet jerked the way a hand moves when it knows it has been caught. She looked at him, then at the dark screen behind her, then at the crowd hunting for a place to hide that did not exist anymore. It took her only a beat to pick a target. She lifted the microphone and pointed the story at me like a light she could turn in any direction. "It is fake," she said, her voice too bright, too fast. She made it up. "My sister has been jealous her whole life. She will do anything to ruin me." Phones swung toward me, faces turned, and for a second, I saw the old script trying to take its place again, the one where I am the problem, the difficult one, the bitter one who cannot stand to see her sister happy. I could have stayed quiet and let the screen speak for me, but I knew that if I did not give the room a single clear line, she would keep reaching for mine. So I stepped forward just enough for my voice to carry without shouting, and I said the only thing that mattered. "If it is fake Jada, why does he say your name and Daniel's?" The sentence was simple, and it landed hard because it asked for an answer she could not bend. Daniel's face changed in front of everyone. He looked at Jada, then down at his own hands, and then at the edge of the stage the way people do when they are trying not to fall. "That is your laugh," he said more to himself than to her. "That is the way you lean when you do not want anyone else to hear." He had loved that laugh once. I had, too. Now it sounded like a key turning in a lock. Jada tried again, tossing out the same words with less air behind them, but the denial was already crumbling. The guests knew what they had seen. They had heard his name. You cannot unhear a name in a room like that. The hush broke into a low tide of whispers and a few sharp, "Oh my gods." Someone near the back let out a flat laugh and then tried to swallow it. A woman at a front table shook her head, and a man I did not recognize said "unbelievable" under his breath, then lifted his phone a little higher. The applause that had carried Jada a minute earlier was gone, replaced by the kind of noise a crowd makes when it is choosing which way to look at a person now. Daniel reached for his ring like it had burned him. He pulled it off slow, like his fingers did not belong to him anymore. Then he let it drop. It hit the wooden stage with a small, hard sound that felt louder than the band had all night. He did not look at me. He did not need to. He looked at Jada with the hollow focus of someone who has just watched his life tilt and slide. Then he turned and walked away, past the head table, down the steps, through the part in the crowd that opened the way a seam opens when the thread is cut. He did not stop when someone called his name. He did not look back. A few people began to clap, not in celebration, but in that awkward, judgmental way that says we see you and we do not like what we see. The shame clap rolled out in pockets scattered and uneasy, while others stood there with their mouths open, and more phones kept recording, because this was what the night had become, now a record that would not go away. Jada reached out like she could pull the moment back toward her, saying, "Wait and please, and this is not what you think," but her voice was breaking at the edges. The mascara she had paid for to be waterproof left faint shadows under her eyes anyway. She looked out over the guests and found no one to hold her weight. Even our mother, who had backed her through every small cruelty, did not move. My father stared at the floor. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I stood where I'd been all night near the door, letting the cold air slip in each time it opened. I did not need to add anything else. The truth had finished what I started. My sister had always been the golden girl because she knew how to keep the light on her and the shadows on everyone else. Tonight, the light caught the one thing she could not control. It caught her. For a long breath, no one seemed to know what to do. A server set down a tray and walked away like he had practiced this kind of exit before. A cousin whispered that someone should turn the music back on, and then thought better of it. Jada lowered the microphone and looked smaller than I had ever seen her. She searched the room for a place to land and found only eyes. I felt the strangest kind of calm, the kind that comes when the storm has finally hit and you realize you are still standing. I had not needed to shout to be heard. I had needed one clear line and the truth on a screen. That was enough. The crowd had turned the way a tide turns slow at first and then all at once. Whatever name they had for me before outsider or problem or jealous sister, it did not matter in that moment. The evidence had given me back my voice, and it had taken hers. I let the calm hold me. I let the room sit in what it had seen. And when Jada finally tried to speak again, the sound of her words felt small against what the night already knew. The videos left the room, the family scrambled to rewrite the story, and I decided how much of their noise I was willing to carry. By morning, my phone was a small storm on a nightstand full of missed calls, blinking messages and links to clips I did not ask for. Guests had posted from every angle, the screen lighting up the line, about heading back before Daniel got suspicious. The ring hitting the floor with that hard little sound that seemed louder on a phone than it had in the hall. Strangers were already giving it titles and choosing sides. Some called it brutal, some called it justice. Some said it was the kind of thing that only happens in movies, except it had happened in my family, and now I could watch it on repeat, whether I wanted to or not. By noon, there were edits with music over the moment the screen came on. People froze Jada's face in the second before she found her words and turned it into 1,000 jokes. There were threads pulling at every detail: who filmed what, who knew what when, whether the bride deserved a second chance or whether the groom should have listened to his gut sooner. I did not comment. I did not share. I did not tag anyone. I put the phone face down and made coffee and tried to remember what quiet felt like. But quiet has a hard time standing up against a feed that refreshes itself every few seconds. It did not take long for the fallout to stop being only social. Someone sent me a screenshot of a statement from Jada's company, a neat paragraph that said she was being placed on leave while they reviewed concerns about conduct and reputation. It was the kind of language that never says the one true thing, and yet says everything you need to know. The golden image she had polished for years had a crack in it now, and companies like hers do not like cracks. My mother called 3 times before I picked up. When I did, her voice came in hot, full of the same urgency she used when dinner was burning or a storm was coming. She said I had shamed the family, that I had humiliated my sister in front of everyone, that I could have handled it privately if I had any respect. She said it the way people say the weather betrayed them, like the truth had broken a promise. I listened, and then I said what I had decided I would say. I did not make her choices. I just pressed play. There was a sharp breath on the other end, a pause that sounded like it could tip toward tears or rage, and then she told me I owed my sister an apology. I told her I would not be doing that. She hung up without saying goodbye. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from my father. 4 words. Sorry for being quiet too long. I stared at it until the words blurred. It did not fix anything. It did not erase the years where I could have used a hand on my shoulder and got a second helping of potatoes instead. But it was a crack in the wall, a small beam of light through a place that had been dark for so long I forgot where the door might be. Riley sent a message too, a short one that said she had seen the clips everywhere, and that she hoped I was eating and sleeping and taking care of myself. She said Jada had locked herself inside, and that our mother was trying to call relatives to explain, as if the internet could be talked down by a landline. She asked if I wanted to talk. I told her I was okay, which was not true, and also true in a different way. I was not okay in the sense that my body kept remembering the feeling of standing by that door, of being mistaken for staff, of being pointed at by my own sister. But I was okay in the way a person can be when their version of reality finally matches what everyone else sees. The day tried to pull me back toward the screen over and over. Links arrived from numbers I did not save. Someone sent me a meme with a laughing emoji, and I blocked the number because I could not bear to teach a stranger how to be human. I went to the studio where I run the art program. I laid out brushes and paper, and I let the children choose colours. I watched a boy pick blue and trace slow lines across a page until they settled into calm. I listened to a girl tell me about her cat while she painted circles in yellow and green. It felt like the first real air I had breathed since the night before. They did not know the story people were telling about me. They only knew that I kept my promises and that there would always be room for them at the table. In the afternoon, my mother texted again a single line asking if I had thought about what I had done. I stared at it until the words looked like they were in another language. I typed and erased many answers before I decided that the only one I would stand by was the simplest. I told the truth. That is all I sent. She did not respond. By evening, a news blog had turned the wedding into content. They used a still of Jada on stage and a still of the screen behind her, and wrote a headline that made it sound like they had been in the room. In the comments, people projected their own sisters and mothers and exes onto us. Some saw me as cruel, some saw me as brave. The thing about a story is that once it leaves your mouth, it stops belonging only to you. I let that be true. I did not chase anyone down to correct them. I did not add details to defend myself. I chose to be quiet on purpose, which feels different than being silenced. Before I slept, I opened the text from my father again and read it out loud. Sorry for being quiet too long. It is a small sentence, but small things can be anchors when the water is rough. I put the phone on the dresser and turned off the light and told myself that I could let the internet have its noise while I kept my own. For once, I was not the problem child. I was not the jealous sister. I was the one who told the truth, and the truth was big enough to carry its own weight without me holding it up. For once, I was not the problem child. I was not the jealous sister. I was the one who told the truth. And the truth was big enough to carry its own weight without me holding it up, and with that thought, I went back to my studio and let the room decide what came next. I did not post. I did not argue. I opened the windows, set out brushes and paper, and stood in front of a blank canvas until the thing that had bruised me the most rose to the surface without force. It was not a face or a fight. It was a chair. I drew the outline first. A single chair at a dressed table, neat plate, folded napkin, small light falling across the seat, and where a name tag should have been, I left a clean rectangle of nothing. I called it empty seat because that is what it was, the truth of a space I was never given. Next came a second canvas, smaller, more direct. A hand holding a glass, edges soft, the kind of grip you take when a stranger presses something into your palm and keeps walking. Behind the glass, a blur of a doorway, and the suggestion of movement, the exact view from the place I had stood at the wedding. I called it invisible guest. I did not try to be clever. I did not chase symbols. I painted what had happened to me, and I let the paint do the work words could not. I worked late for a week, not with fury, but with a steady kind of focus I had not felt in months. Between sessions with the kids at my program, I added layers, set canvases aside to dry, stepped back to see if the images told the truth, without me explaining them. When I felt they did, I called a small gallery in Albany that had shown community work before and asked if they had room for a short run. The owner had seen the clips from the wedding because everyone had, but she did not ask about them. She asked how many paintings I had and when I wanted to hang them. We picked a date, and I carried the canvases in myself one by one, the way you carry something you are not willing to drop. Opening night was simple. There were white walls, quiet music, a table with water and paper cups. People wandered in not because there was a big name on the flyer, but because the story had travelled without me, and curiosity is a strong current. They stopped in front of empty seat and stood longer than they expected to stand in front of a chair. Some put their hands on their mouths. Some looked at the blank space where the name tag should have been and whispered that they knew that feeling. Then they moved to invisible guest, and I watched their faces change as they saw the hand, the glass, the half frame of the door, the half-life of a person who has been told to stand and watch. A woman came up to me and said she had sat in the break room of her own family for years. A man said he was the oldest of 5, and had been passed over so often he learned not to ask why. A teenager said she was the first queer person in her family, and no one had ever put her name on anything. They did not ask me to explain my work. They told me who they were. More people came the next day, and the next. Some cried and apologized for crying as if tears were a disruption in a room designed for quiet. I told them it was fine. I told them the paintings were built to hold the weight. The gallery set out a small box with a note about my art program, and people put bills and checks in it and asked if there was a way to donate online. Parents sent emails that said, "Thank you for giving their children a table where no one rushed them and no one called them difficult when they needed a moment to breathe." One mother wrote that her son had slept through the night for the first time after a class where he painted his favourite animal, a blue whale that looked like a sky. She said she did not quite understand how it worked, only that it did. The money that came in from strangers and neighbours and co-workers I barely knew allowed me to add an extra class each week to buy better brushes that held paint the way small hands need them to bring in a therapist part-time who understood sensory overload better than I do. I felt a quiet pride settle in my chest that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with building something that might outlast a scandal. My family did not come. They did not text. It stung, but it also told the truth. Their absence made the room feel honest. No one in that gallery was clapping for a performance. They were standing with a story that looked like their own. On the last day, I stood alone in front of empty seats and looked at the blank space where a name should be. It did not make me feel small anymore. It made me feel steady, like I had taken the piece of the night that tried to erase me and turned it into something you cannot look away from. The seat they never gave me had become a seat I offered to anyone who had been pushed aside. I had not fixed my family. I had not changed who my sister was. But I had changed the shape of my silence. I was no longer the woman at the door, I was the one holding the brush. The story was mine, so I chose the kind of life that did not ask me to beg for a seat, and did not ask me to wait for anyone to hand me peace. In the weeks after the gallery closed, I let my days find their own rhythm. I opened the studio early, aired out the paint, set out paper and small cups of water, and greeted the children by name as they came in with their parents. I watched them choose colours the way some people choose words. Careful at first, then brave until the page felt safe. It was a quiet kind of joy, the sort that does not need a witness or a caption. Donations kept coming, small ones and generous ones, and with them came notes from people I had never met who said they had seen themselves in a chair with no name, and felt less alone. I hired another instructor so we could add a class, and I brought in a therapist 2 afternoons a week to help when the room became too bright or too loud. I learned to trust that the work would hold. I did not refresh my phone for comments. I did not chase the latest clip. If something needed my attention, it found me. The rest I let pass. My mother called a few times and left messages that moved from anger to worry and then to the kind of guilt that had shaped my childhood. One afternoon, I answered, and in a calm voice, I told her the only truth I had left to give her. I am not angry anymore. I am just done. I said I wished her well, and that when she was ready to talk about respect and not roles, I would be here, and then I ended the call before the old patterns could drag me back into a room where I did not fit. My father sent another short text, and then asked if I wanted coffee. We sat in a small diner and talked about the shop and the weather and my classes, and when he put his hand on mine for a second, I knew it was all he could give, and that I could accept it without making it carry more than it could hold. Jada stayed silent. Sometimes silence is a door closing. Sometimes it is a road that splits. I let it be what it was and did not follow it. I spent a Saturday walking the art district in Albany with a sketchbook in my bag and the sun on my face. I stopped to watch a street musician bought a sandwich from a cart and felt something steady settle inside me. It was not triumph. It was not the rush of a score finally even. It was the simple relief of not carrying their version of me on my back. I did not need my family to validate what I had built to know that it had value. I saw the proof in the way a child's shoulders relaxed at a table that belonged to him, in the way a mother's voice softened when she realized no one in this room would call her child a problem, in the way strangers had turned a painting into a mirror and found themselves stronger for it. In my world, I learned that truth and boundaries are not rude. They are a kind of respect. In this country, people say that justice belongs in a courtroom or in a shouting match, but sometimes justice is a quiet thing. Sometimes it arrives with a single button that says, play, and then it does not need you to argue for it anymore. I do not pretend that peace is a straight line. Some nights I still wake with the image of a door in my head, the one where I was asked for ice as if I belonged on the other side of it. When that happens, I breathe. And I remember the gallery wall, and the box where people left notes, and I remember the boy who painted the blue whale and slept through the night. That is enough to carry me back to morning. I no longer look for my name on charts or lists. I write it on supply orders and grant applications, and the sign taped to the studio door that tells parents we are full, but there is a wait list and we will call. I answer messages from volunteers who want to help, and from teachers who want to learn how to make a classroom feel kinder. I keep the studio lights warm and the rules simple. Everyone sits, everyone gets time. Everyone's name is said out loud. When I lock up at the end of the day and step onto the sidewalk, I feel like myself, in a way I did not know how to feel when I was working so hard to be seen by people who refused to look. I once was the shadow. Turns out, when you flip the screen at the right moment, even shadows shine.